Okay guys, welcome again. In this video I will explain about DNS or domain name system. What is DNS and how does it work? All computers on the internet works by numbers. Computers and other similar devices talk and identify with each other over a network, which is by using numbers such as IP addresses. On the other hand, humans using names instead of numbers, whether it is talking directly to another person or identifying a country, place, or thing. Humans identify with names instead of numbers. So, in order to bridge the communication gap between computers and humans and make the communication a lot easier, networking engineers developed DNS or domain name system. The domain name system is one of the foundations of the internet, working in the background to match the names of websites that people type into a search box with the corresponding IP address. To be more specific, it resolves domain names to IP addresses. So, if you type in a web address in your web browser, DNS will resolve the name to a number because the only thing computers know are numbers. So, for example, if you wanted to go to a certain website, you would open up your web browser and type in the domain name of that website. Also, it is still possible for someone to type an IP address into a browser to reach a website, but most people want an internet address to consist of easy to remember words called domain names. There are currently more than 342 million registered domains, so keeping all those names in a single directory would be difficult. So, for example, let's use cisco.com. Now, technically, you really don't have to type in cisco.com to retrieve the Cisco web page. You can just type in the IP address instead if you already knew what the IP address was. But since we are not accustomed to memorizing and dealing with numbers, especially when there are millions of websites on the internet, we type in the domain name and DNS converts it to an IP address for us. When you type in cisco.com in your web browser, the DNS server will search through its database to find a matching IP address for that domain name. And when it finds it, it will resolve the domain name to the IP address for the Cisco website. And once that it is done, then your computer is able to communicate with the Cisco web server and retrieve the web page. So, DNS basically works like a phone book. When you want to find a number, you don't look up the number first, you look up the name first, then it will give you the number. Okay, to clarify and more details, let's examine the steps that DNS takes. When you type in cisco.com in your web browser, and if your web browser or operating system cannot find the IP address in its own cache memory, it will send a query to the next level called the resolver server. The resolver server is basically your ISP or Internet Service Provider. When the resolver receives the query, it will check its own cache memory to find an IP address for cisco.com. And if it cannot find it, it will send the query to the next level, which is the root server. When the root server receives the query for the IP address for cisco.com, the root server is not going to know what the IP address is, but the root server does know where to send the resolver to help it find the IP address. The root server will direct the resolver to the TLD or top level domain server for .com domain. So the resolver will now ask the TLD server for the IP address for Cisco.com. The top level domain server stores the address information for top level domains such as .com, .net, .org, and so on. This particular TLD server manages .com domain, which Cisco.com is a part of it. So, when the TLD server receives the query for the IP address for Cisco.com, the TLD server is not going to know what the IP address is for Cisco.com. So, the TLD will direct the resolver to the next and final level, which are the authoritative name servers. So, once again, the resolver will now ask the authoritative name server for the IP address for Cisco.com. The authoritative name server or servers are responsible for knowing everything about the domain, which includes the IP address. They are the final authority. So, when the authoritative name server receives the query from the resolver, the name server will respond with the IP address for Cisco.com. And finally, the resolver will tell your computer the address for Cisco.com, and then your computer can now retrieve the Cisco webpage. It is important to note that once the resolver receives the IP address, it will store it in its cache memory in case it receives another query for Cisco.com, so it does not have to go through all those steps again. I hope this information is useful to you, and I want to thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, please subscribe my channel.